Don't want to run too long. Okay, thank you. All right, thank you all for joining me today. I'm going to try to take a humorous look at protecting phalanges from processor pressure points. Does everybody understand what that basically says? Okay, how to keep your toes safe. Okay, so we're going to go over the scenario I'm going to describe. I'll give an example story. We'll talk about units and some assumptions. Then I'll walk through a very simplistic, probably partially inaccurate real-world calculation. And we can do some comparisons, say, okay, what does that mean to me? Then I'll talk about some realistic and not so realistic preventative measures. And then, time permitting, I've got a funny poem that you could probably all appreciate about how the Ode stole Christmas break. Okay, so, see if my thing's working here. Good, all right. So, why am I talking about, dropping a laptop on your foot? Well, why not, right? We often take ourselves too seriously. We don't think about the injuries you might get actually working with a computer. In fact, show of hands, who's actually injured themselves on a computer at least once? Yeah, you wouldn't think you could do it, but I was working with a computer one day and pushed the little pop-out steel panel. Next thing you know, I'm missing a chunk of my finger. So, ouch. And a lot of people, who's dropped a computer? Yeah, okay. Who's dropped a phone? But you've never dropped your phone before? Like everybody drops their phone. Okay, all right. But seriously, let's take a break from the technology for a minute here and not get too wrapped up. We kind of need to take the lighter side. As Amanda was talking earlier in Converge, like we take things a little too seriously. Let's get out of our headspace. So imagine this scenario. You've got an average size and weight laptop, many of what you see here today. And we're going to say it's a typical drop from the top of someone's hips. So right at the top of your pelvis, we're going to estimate that to be about a meter. It's stationary, so it's a clean drop with respect to the ground. And it lands squarely on one of your big toes. Who's already feeling the pain from that? Exactly. All right. So that's the scenario, and I'm going to do some very simple physics calculations to kind of show you what that looks like. For starters, why is this not working? Hold on a second. We'll do it that way. There we go. Trigger warning. There is a mildly icky, ouchy photo to come. It's not that gross, I assure you. But just, look away now if you're squeamish about bruising. Okay, everybody ready? Yeah, okay. This is what happens when you drop a computer or a phone on your foot. You can see the typical bruising around here. This is landed squarely on my wife's toe, so it kind of took a nice bruise there. And I have children, so there's a nice little boo-boo bunny here she was trying to use to make it feel better. Fairly representative, right? You've got, as it's falling, it's going to land, say, squarely on a big toenail. Going to transfer all of its pressure. That often then rebounds, bounces up, and lands and hits the foot. So you end up with 2 injuries for the price of 1. Yay. Okay, so enough of the icky photos. Let's get back to the actual topic at hand here. Physics. And no, I'm not going to do ballistic physics about throwing a basketball, but we are going to do some of this stuff here. We're going to take the distance. We're going to figure out how it changes with acceleration due to gravity. We're going to figure out the time, and then we're going to figure out how fast it's going, and then we're going to leverage all those calculations to feed into the actual calculation of how much force and pressure it's putting on. Okay. Not to get too much into the physics, but these are the quantities we're going to look at. We're going to talk about mass in kilograms, and yeah, I'm doing everything in metric, except for where I have stuff in English. It's mainly just because the calculations are a little more straightforward. I prefer metric, but we all think in English. Anyway, so we've got a mass in kilograms. We've got our distance in meters. So for those of you not familiar, who doesn't know what a meter is? Nobody? Okay, good. We're going to talk about time in seconds. We're going to look at velocity in meters a second. We're going to look at acceleration in meters per second. So for every second it gets that much faster or slower. And that's going to then help us be able to calculate the force in newtons, which is a kilogram meter per second squared. And then we'll talk about pressure in pascals. So I'm going to go over my assumptions as we go through this simple calculation. So let's say we have a clean drop onto the floor. That is, it was held in a hand. dropped with no initial velocity from a height of about 1 meter. A typical laptop, I did some research on this, is about 2.3 kilograms. So that's around 5 pounds or so. And that includes the battery. We're talking about gravitational acceleration close to the Earth. So that's 9.81 meters per second per second. It means for every second it falls, it gets 9.81 meters per second faster. I'm going to calculate based on simple point masses. That's so we just don't overcomplicate things. I'm going to talk about ideal conditions so we don't worry about air resistance, although if you really want to get fancy, we could. But let's just keep it simple, stupid. I'm making some estimates as to the size and compressibility of a toe. I'm going to say, let's say it hits your big toe, and a big toe is about 1 centimeter tall. And when you factor in the flesh and the bone, it can compress about halfway. And it falls directly on a big toenail, which is, let's estimate that to be 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter. So that's our target, a big toe. I'm feeling the pain of that already. Ouch. Okay, so that's our list of assumptions. Just a little disclaimer. I am neither a lawyer nor a physicist. Do we have any physics majors or physicists in the house today? Nope. Okay, good. So nobody will call me out on my inaccurate stuff if I get that far. Okay, good. I've done my due diligence to try to make sure I got these things accurate, and for estimate purposes, I think it'll come across just fine. So, how are we going to get to understanding how much pressure that is? Well, we're going to go over calculate the time to drop. We can use that time to drop to estimate the speed at impact. We can then use that speed at impact to determine what kind of force would be necessary to decelerate it over a certain distance. We can then use that force divided by the area of the target to determine what pressure it is, and then we can take that pressure calculation and compare that to real-world examples to say, hey, is it more or less than this? And then at the end, I'm going to have some humorous and somewhat serious ways to actually protect yourselves from falling computers. Either protect the computer first or the person. So, problem number 1. How long does it take to drop? Well, we can calculate that based on displacement. So we can say, well, the displacement, S, and not to be confused with seconds, S is the sum of how far it goes due to just the initial velocity, plus how far it additionally travels based on the acceleration over time. So we can do some funky algebra with the quadratic formula and convert that around to actually solve for the value of t, the time. But because we have some useful initial conditions, it was initial velocity of 0, we can say, okay, well, initial velocity is 0, the acceleration is equal to the acceleration due to gravity, and we know the distance is 1 meter. We can use that to calculate time t. So what I've done here at the bottom is to actually put in some real numbers. And we come up with about 0.45 seconds, so not quite half a second. For those of you who have dropped a computer before, don't feel bad. The average human response time is about 1/4 of a second, about 25 thousandths or hundredths of a second. So you didn't have a whole lot of wiggle room to be able to catch that computer anyway. Okay, problem number 2. How fast is it going when it hits the ground? Well, we already calculated the time. We can plug that back into the acceleration formula, and we can figure out how fast is it going. Well, we know the initial velocity was 0. We know the pull of gravity. We already calculated time t, so we can put all that together. And we can say the final velocity is equal to the force of gravity times the time, and this is the formula we calculated for time, to actually, calculate all that out, equals about 4.43 meters a second. So not quite 4.5 meters per second. That's going pretty fast by the time it hits. Fun fact, because we're talking about small bodies compared to the size of the Earth, it doesn't really matter much what the thing that you're dropping is. They're all going to be going about 4.5 meters per second by the time they fall in 1 meter in distance. You'd have to get something into the planetesimal size before that would make a difference. Okay. Problem number 3. How much force does it actually equal? Well, if we can think of the force necessary to decelerate it, we can take that and say, let's estimate that big toe was about 1 centimeter, and it squishes halfway, so we know it decelerates over the distance of about 0.5 centimeter. or 5/1000ths of a meter, 5 millimeters. So we can then take that as this formula that shows acceleration as a value of the final velocity over a certain distance. So we know the speed squared divided by twice the distance compressed equals the amount of acceleration necessary. So in order to slow that computer, and we think about dropping a computer, it's going to first have to stop, right? I brought a little ball to demonstrate. It's going to have to first stop, and then it can come back up again. But first it has to totally stop and then come back up. So think about what a computer has to do. It has to completely stop. So what we see there is the amount of acceleration necessary to stop that in a very short distance. So it's going to take an acceleration, or in this case a negative acceleration, a deceleration if you will, of 1900 meters per second to come back to a resting stop at that distance as it squishes your toe. So we can use that because force equals mass times acceleration. Now we can start to figure out an actual quantity that uses the mass, force. So we know it's 2.3 kilograms. We know we've got 1900 meters per second squared slowdown. So it's about 4,500 newtons. Newton is a measure of force. So we've got that many, 4.5 kilonewtons, whatever you want to call that. 4,500 newtons roughly is how much force it requires pushed back up from your toe to stop that computer falling on it. So we've calculated speed, time, force. Now let's think about what pressure that is. Well, pressure is force over a given area. And so we make the assumption that that force is kind of equally distributed across your toenail, pushing back up with that amount of force. We can say that, well, the size of a toenail, similar to a thumbnail, is about 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter. That's 1/10,000th of a square meter. Pressure is force over that area, so we can take the force that we already calculated, divide it by the area, and come up with 45,126 kilopascals. That seems like kind of a big number for pressure because most people are used to pounds per square inch. But this is pascals, so we're talking about metric numbers. Yeah, pascals tend to be kind of large, so if you kind of do the conversion there, 45.1 megapascals. What does that mean? Okay, so whoop-de-doo, right? Well, if you want to put it in something that you might be able to kind of grok easily, a elephant foot pressing on the ground is about 54 kilopascals. It doesn't mean there's not a whole lot of weight from the elephant, it just means the pressure under the foot is about 54 kilopascals. Okay, so think about a lady's high heel or a man's high heel, doesn't matter who. Somebody's high heel is about 6,000 kilopascals. So a water knife, for reference, is about 690 megapascals. So it only gets worse if you calculate the smaller contact area like a corner, but there's a good reference, right? So it's more pressure than a high heel squishing down on your toe. Will it hurt? I think the answer, obviously, intuitively is, yeah, it'll hurt. There's no doubt about that. Just how much? Well, skin breaks at about 100 psi, I'm told. So if you figure that translated, this is where you have to do the conversion from English to metric. That's about 689 kilopascals. So if that laptop put about 45,000 kilopascals, that's got to be greater than 100 psi. So the answer would be, yeah, it'll hurt. It'll cut your skin under the right conditions. Okay, well, what about the bone in your toe? Could it break your toe? Well, I was able to scrounge up a number that says about 4,000 newtons will break a bone. There's certainly conditions that apply, whether it's in the right longitudinal direction versus perpendicular. That computer is probably going to compress perpendicular to the bone, so it could very likely break it, because 4,500 is larger than 4,000. So yeah, you could break your toe in the right conditions, and I'm sure people have. Okay, but I only carry a smartphone. Well, yeah, it has a mass of 138 grams, or about 1/10 of a kilogram, maybe a little bit more. And it's going to reach the same velocity when it hits your toe either way. So when you also factor in that the corners on a cell phone are pointy, sometimes rounded, but still very pointy, and the edges are thinner, it's still going to hurt or injure you when it drops on the foot. In fact, I have plenty of people I know who've dropped their phone on their toe and have an injury very similar to what I showed earlier. Okay, so what can I do if I drop my laptop on my foot? Well, dance around, it burns calories. Also helps distract you. Swearing profusely has been shown to be very helpful. It helps distract you and dull the sense of pain that's shooting through your foot or your toe at the time. If you do happen to get cut, quick tip, direct pressure. It helps stop the bleeding. And if you lose a toe, put it on ice and get to the ER right away. Otherwise, they might end up calling you Stumpy. Okay, so we've gone over the force. We looked at how much that's going to hurt me. Who's having like sympathy pains right now? Yeah, me too. Ouch, it hurts just thinking about it. Okay, so how can we protect ourselves? So now I'm going to go over some funny ideas for how we might actually be able to protect ourselves from these falling laptops that are out to destroy our toes. Okay, well, what about kid-proofing? Anybody have children? Yeah, you're used to the little corner bumpers and whatnot. What if we just put those on our laptops? It might help, right? If you really, really want to protect things, put them on your toes, too. We could have some fun with bungee cords and strap it to our hands so we can't possibly drop it, or strap it to the table so it wouldn't slide off. This is a more practical one. This is a lesson in automotive safety. So who's noticed the squishy padding on your dashboard? So, a few decades ago that didn't exist. It was just a hard metal dashboard or wooden or whatever. Now we have padded dashboards, so they're designed to have somebody hit them and squish and help dissipate the energy rather than just, cut into whatever human thing that was flying at it. So what if we did padded corners or padded edges on laptops? Maybe for ruggedized it would be very helpful. Because we're so vexed with protecting the laptop, we're not thinking about protecting the humans. We could also do another lesson from automotive. We could put in crumple zones. Imagine that you sacrifice a side of the laptop in some sort of replaceable component, like a quarter panel, to protect the toe that it fell on. Who's seen this before? Okay. This is an airbag bike helmet. It goes around your neck, and it basically stays there in this collar, and when it detects that your head is moving towards the ground at a rapid pace, it suddenly inflates like an airbag, and it envelops your head. What if we had laptop airbags? So you're not only going to be dropping your laptop. Okay, neck lanyards. We use these with cameras all the time. We use it with soap on a rope. Why not neck lanyards? Well, the one drawback I could think of is 5 pounds around your neck. It's a little hard, might kind of make you stoop funny, exacerbate any back problems you might have. Okay. But seriously, we can also think about some just simple, straightforward preventative risk management. Don't leave it on the edge of a table where your kid could grab it and pull it down. Always place it in a padded bag before you carry it everywhere. Improve your grip strength. Also useful in other areas. So you get the little squishy balls that they were giving away recently. If you're in a common work site, you might see they have steel-toed shoes. You could wear those if you wanted to. They have some very nice looking ones these days. And finally, learn binary. Because if you can't beat them, join them. When the computers take over, at least you know how to talk to them and ask them not to squish you. Okay, so I got about 5 minutes left, I think it was. Okay, close enough. Okay, great. So I'm serious about this. I wrote a poem about MS11-100. I'm going to read it for you to fill in a little time, and because I think it's hilarious. Hopefully you will too. Okay, so this is an actual poem about MS11-100 I wrote about 5 years ago. Okay, I'll tell you of MS11-100, in case now, my friends, you ever have wondered. A 2011-3414 CVE for a problem first mentioned in 2003. Many web platforms were vulnerable. Why, most of them really, practically all. Here's details about hashes and tables most prime. A source string goes in, out a number sublime. It should be quite tricky to predict what comes out. In this case, that wasn't. That's what the fuss was about. Hashes get used in all kinds of places, from signatures to passwords to memory spaces. What happens when hashes by chance do collide? Well, it seldom is good for the code that's inside. Most companies were on lockdown for the holiday season, staffing and risk dodging the typical reason. Employees were at home with families relaxing, or perhaps at the spa, their backs needing waxing. The details of a meet-in-the-middle attack were released late December by folks without tact. Picked up by the attackers unscrupulously, all hell broke loose in the technology. Denial of service on Windows and Nixes. Microsoft and others hurried the fixes. Patches released at a time out of band for operations teams spread throughout the land. Bosses and test teams and admins were called, so deploying the fixes would not be stalled. What started as simple denial of service turned into something that made the security folks nervous. Microsoft looked round and found that the issues were actually something that attackers could misuse. EOP, they declared before the hackers in a security blog posting. We'll be fixing it before the hackers are boasting. Protecting our customers is important to us. We'll fix more than this O-Day that's making you cuss. Ops teams arrived with a groan and a grumble. I was getting my back waxed, one was heard to mumble. Let's get out this patch to the servers already. But patches could make all the servers unsteady. Deploying the patch is a problem quite easy. Now testing a patch, that makes admins queasy. So ops teams all struggled and toiled in the land to test and deploy this patch made out of band. They sacrificed time when they should have been resting, while attackers sat back making comments and jesting. So here are some lessons in this story for learning. That way our salaries we all are earning. Be prepared to test patches and workarounds in a hurry, so out-of-band releases won't make you worry. And even though holiday staffing is smaller, be ready to bring them all back at a holler. Use really good hashes no matter what you're assessing, so crafting collisions will keep hackers guessing. And if your hash functions collide while indexing, make sure that you've tested or you will be vexing. Is your team prepared for this story most foul, or would you just give up and throw in the towel? Thank you. Okay, last, a shout out. My wife, that was a picture of her toe. Unfortunately, it's when she dropped her phone on it and it hit just on that little corner. Ow. Similarly, my coworker, Bill, he did something similar with his actual computer. The computer didn't fare very well, nor did his toe, but I think the computer got the better end of the deal. BSides for having me and putting up with my silly poem, and Converge Conference for letting me talk a couple of years in a row now. Thank you.